If you're just getting into backpacking in 2025, there's a ton of decisions to make. It can be totally overwhelming, and the budget that you could spend is extreme. Today, I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned over the last few years that I think will really make this process a lot easier for you, as well as getting the most bang for your buck when you're buying gear. Whether you're buying sleeping bags, tents, backpacks, you name it, I want to break it down for you in this video here today. So today I want to start actually with tents and explain what are the basic differences. Here we have an ultralight trekking pole tent, which means it doesn't have any interior tent pole structure other than the trekking poles. It is the lightest, but perhaps most complicated way to go backpacking. Here I have a tent that's about 120 bucks. Here it's a $650 tent, and we'll talk about the options in between. All right, so I wanted to go through my budget option first. One of the really pleasant developments in backpacking, I think, in the last few years is the expanding range of good quality budget gear. And I've been discovering that there are some truly fantastic options for you out there. So I'm sitting in the Featherstone Granite 2-person tent, and this is something that I found on Amazon last year for 109 bucks. They were sold out for a long time. They have an updated version that I believe has some tweaks that's now 130 bucks. But this was one of my gems that I found last year. And this is also an example of a double-walled freestanding tent. So I'm going to be talking about some terms that if you're new to backpacking, that might be mystifying to you. But the term double wall essentially just means that there's an inner mesh and an outer rainfly. Single wall tents only have the one rainfly, and that is the all-encompassing tent. So as you're going through, I think it's important to know some of the language pieces that might also be confusing. This type of freestanding double wall tent is the most common, basic, and honestly the type of tent I would probably recommend for most people out there. They are the easiest to set up. They are typically the least expensive, and you can just use them in just about any conditions. Man, it is really coming down. So one of the common mistakes I see people making when they're first getting into backpacking is that the backpack itself is about the first decision they make. And in fact, I think it should be the last decision that you make. So if you have a budget and then you want to spend it on sleep and a tent and all your fancy stoves and gear and things like that, if you lean more towards the budget side of things, then you really are probably going to need a bigger backpack, because budget gear is typically bulkier, a little bit heavier, and it's just going to fit differently inside your backpack. So hold off on that decision for now until we go through a few more of these things. So this is your typical nylon tent. It has got nylon fly, and that's great. It's the most budget fabric out there. It's suitable for backpacking. It's reasonably light. It's not ultralight, but because it's raining, it's a perfect time to show you how saggy this nylon will get. So as it just gets saturated, that fabric itself is going to sag. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it is something to know if you're looking at getting it. It can start to get a little depressing looking as it gets really wet. And I want to share that against the backdrop of a very high-end fabric known as Dyneema or DCF fabric, which you'll see. And this is a very premium fabric, very lightweight, very durable, but when water gets on it, it doesn't sag at all. And it does a very effective job of shedding rain without sacrificing any sag or anything like that. Now, if you noticed, this is a different tent. This actually has the tent poles on the outside, which is kind of curious. So the other ones, the rainfly will go over the tent poles. This one, the tent poles go on the outside. And what that means is you can do a fly first pitch, which basically protects it in a rainstorm like this. You can pitch the tent. So if you're going to be backpacking in a very rainy area, you might consider a tent like this, or a tent where the rainfly pitches first, because that can be a very easy way to keep your gear dry in a wet environment. Now, if you're new to backpacking, you probably are a little bit hesitant about how much you want to spend. But the good news is that you can get some really high quality gear without paying a huge amount. Now, I have a full spectrum of gear here. This tent costs around 120 bucks that I found on Amazon, and I have a spectrum. So a $120 tent, followed by a $370 tent. So that's getting up in price. That's pretty pricey, but it is still well below the top end. This is a $550 tent, which is a very premium, more ultralight trekking pole tent, the kind of tent that a thru hiker would invest in, but might not be the best suited tent for just your general introduction to backpacking. Then I have my most premium tent here, the Nemo Hornet Elite, which is a $650 tent. Very premium, semi-freestanding tent, weighs only 2 pounds. So one of the benefits of this tent is you get some serious weight savings, but you definitely pay for it with price. This is a 4-pound tent, so what you get for the cheaper $120-ish price tag, you pay for it in weight and bulk. This is the lightest, slimmest tent I have. It's a 1-pound tent, 16 ounces, crazy, crazy light, but again, very expensive, $550. And I kind of have my tweener tent, which is a very premium, very nice tent, but could be suitable for your general backpacking and for more introductory backpackers out there, but it costs $370. Still expensive, but not so crazy expensive as to price out almost everybody who is considering getting into the market. So if you're wondering what tent should I buy, well, my first recommendation for a beginner backpacker is to not spend too much money on a tent. It's really tempting to go for something very sleek and sexy and spend up to $700 on a tent. But for most people out there, unless you are really spending a ton of time on trail, I just think it's not necessary. So I think that you can absolutely spend under $200 and get a very nice tent. But I'll have some links below to some pieces of gear that I think are very suitable for all your different price points. But to just keep things simple, I think one of the best things to do is just look for a fully freestanding double wall tent that is in the sub $200 category. And I think that that will open up a whole world of backpacking to you. If you have a little bit more budget, then I would say something like this tent would be great, in that $300 to $400 category. You can really get some elite, very premium gear, but without still spending the top end that is possible out there. Now, there might be a big temptation to go and just go for the sexiest tent you can get and get like a trekking pole, like a thru hiker's ultralight tent. And these are fantastic tents, don't get me wrong. I actually really love this tent. It's one of my favorites, but I don't necessarily recommend it for beginning backpackers. I think they can be finicky, they can be a little tough to understand, a little tough to navigate setting them up, but they are fantastic tents. This tent is also an example of a single wall tent. So you can actually see there is fabric, there is an inner mesh, but it connects directly to the rainfly itself. So most of these other tents, all these other tents, I could take the rainfly off completely if I wanted to, if the weather was nice, if I wanted to stargaze. And this is all integrated, and this is for weight savings. So the real reason to do a single wall tent is to have as little fabric and material as possible to make it as light as possible. Now, the benefits to this is weight savings. The downside to this is moisture management. It can often get very dewy, kind of wet inside because there's not an additional barrier between you and this outside layer or the rainfly. Now, these are fantastic. They're light, they're minimal, they're great for certain types of backpacking, but for the average backpacker out there, I think that I would steer you away and more towards either a semi-freestanding tent or a fully freestanding tent. So I've showed you the fully freestanding tent and I've showed you the trekking pole tent, and there's one more category, the semi-freestanding tent. So this is one of my favorite tents, but this is a little bit unique because it's a hybrid. So it's got this single pole that runs through and then kind of forks out at the end and kind of creates a Y, but you still need 2 stakes to pull the tent out wide to give it the full structure of the tent. So it does mostly use a tent pole, but then it also requires some additional staking, some additional guying out to give it that full tent structure. And actually, I really like these types of tents. I think they're a great hybrid, a great mix, a great way to save some weight. But again, just a tiny bit more finicky than the fully freestanding options that are out there. All right, I was hoping to film this whole video out here on that beautiful outdoors, but because of today's weather and the week of weather that's ahead, I'm gonna move this thing inside my studio. All right, magic of cinema, here we go. I think one of the least sexy but most important things of a backpacking kit is what you sleep on top of. So the sleeping pad or sleeping mattress makes, I think, the biggest difference in anything that you could possibly buy. Now, what I find that tends to happen, and I've said this before on my channel, is that people buy all of the other things, the backpack, the tent, the sleeping bag, the stove, the water filter, all that stuff, and then they buy this last, and they're out of money, so they just get one of these kind of foam closed cell mattresses that it just don't do minimal amounts of good. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes people make is to just rely upon these. Now, I don't mind actually carrying these. I think that they have their time and their place. But for most people, if this is their experience of sleeping mat, it's pretty minimal and it's not very comfortable. Two things that it's going to really affect is just physically feeling comfortable. It's minimally soft. And then, of course, R value. R value is how we measure insulation. And these have about 1.5 to 2, depending on the mat that you get. And that really isn't going to do a whole lot to keep you warm from the ground. And oftentimes, one of the biggest things that people feel, even if their sleeping bag is adequately warm, is they still feel cold because heat is moving from their body down into the ground through their mattress or their pad. And so, you know, there's nothing wrong with having these. I actually like having them as a backup. They cost anywhere from like usually 30 to 80 bucks. So they are on the more budget end, but I think that we can do a lot better. So let's look at some other options. Actually, have these in reverse order. Okay, this is a big upgrade over the closed cell foam mattress without being a huge step up in price. This is the Perea Outdoors Recharge XL. This costs 100 bucks. And this has vastly more R value. This has about a 4.6 R value on this mattress. And what that means is that anything over 4, I think, puts it firmly in the pretty warm category, especially if you go back into what things used to be, what I used to sleep on top of. This is like a pretty massive upgrade and still being a budget. So at 99 bucks, I think that this will go a long way into making you way more comfortable than the closed cell foam mattress. This is made by a small US company. It's kind of like a cottage industry company that focuses more on budget gear. And of all the things that they make, I think that this is their big winner. I've used some other gear of theirs, that's fine, but this is like a standout piece of gear that I really like at the $100 price point. But if you want to step it up even more, this right here is one of my favorite mattresses of all time. This is the new Zenbivy Ultralight mattress. It's been out for about a year and a half, and I think that this has actually made a huge difference to me. Two things that happened. It got way lighter and smaller while also increasing and boosting the R value. So it's a 4.8, so comparable to the Perea Outdoors, which is rather warm. But by doing so, it also shrank a lot in size. Like this is about half or 60% of the size and weight of some of the other options that are out on the market. So if you really want to up your game, I think that this is a big time investment that will pay off hugely. This costs about 199 bucks for this particular version, and I think that that is absolutely worth it. So this is really one of the biggest things that I have come to fall in love with, is a very good mattress paired with a sleep system, paired with a sleeping bag that I think is like really where you feel at home on a backpacking trip. And with that, let's talk about some sleeping bags. Again, if you're new to backpacking, something that you're going to come up with is the difference between sleeping bags and quilts. Now, sleeping bags have been the standard for a really long time. However, quilts have really made an emergence, and you might be thinking to yourself, if you're considering getting into backpacking, that quilts are how you do it. That's just, they're cool, they're lightweight, they're very popular in the thru hiking crowd, and that might be what you want. And while quilts are great, I think that they're probably not the best place to start if you're newer to backpacking. It can be a great place to save weight, to save some bulk and space into your pack, and they can actually be quite good. And there are some that I think are excellent. But if you're just getting into backpacking, I think the best place to start is just a baseline good quality mummy bag, such as the Kelty Cosmic 20. Now, this is one of the better budget bags that I think I've found in the last year or so. This retails for about 160 bucks. Kelty is a brand that has been around for decades and has long had a tradition of making kind of more budget-friendly entry-level type gear. And this has been actually a really nice sleeping bag that I found it to be very good for 3-season and like spring, summer, fall type backpacking when the temperatures are relatively mild. Now, if we're talking about temperatures and all those things about sleeping bags, you got to know that temperature ratings, so this is a 20-degree sleeping bag, but that does not necessarily mean that it will be warm and comfortable for you if the temperatures do in fact hit 20 degrees. It's actually referring more to the limit, which is where the the sleeping bag will keep you alive and on that fringe edge of sleep to not sleep, but you won't quite be comfortable. A sleeping bag like this, you'll probably be more comfortable in like the 35-degree Fahrenheit and up range, and it also does really matter what mattress you're pairing it with. So to get the full 20-degree value out of it, you're going to also need to pair it with something over, I think, 4.5 R value. But so if you're pairing it with like just a foam mat that's R2, it's not going to feel that warm at all, really. So again, this video is mostly for the beginner crowd, so that's kind of something that I feel like is important to talk about. Temperature ratings do not always tell the full story, and so this 20-degree bag will keep you comfortable in like that over-freezing 35, 40-degree Fahrenheit range and warmer. Sleeping bag got a little wet from my adventures filming outside. I did not wet my sleeping bag. This is the Nemo Rift. This is a 15-degree sleeping bag. This is actually one of my favorite bags that's out there. But this is a little bit of a mix. It's not quite a mummy bag. Mummy being it's going to be really confined on the shape, really narrow. This is what's called like a spoon-shaped sleeping bag, and it gives you a lot of room to move inside the bag. It kind of contours more for your body. It allows for more movement. If you're a side sleeper, if you're a stomach sleeper, these are generally going to be a better sleeping bag pairing for you to invest in. One of the reasons why I like this is that it also has these kind of gills, if you will, which you can open up and close down depending on temperature, so you can make the sleeping bag a little bit more suitable for warmer temperatures, which, you know, if you're mostly backpacking in the summertime when the temperatures might not get below 50, if you have a 15-degree sleeping bag, you might feel pretty warm at night. So being able to kind of open these up and have them be a lot more comfortable for you like that can be really helpful. This is one of my favorite sleeping bags. So if you are considering that kind of mid-grade, maybe even upper-end sleeping bag, this is one that I really endorse. I think it's a great bag. I've had a lot of luck with it. But let's talk about some quilt options. All right, so something that's become really popular within the thru hiking community is quilts. Now, instead of a full-on sleeping bag, these are literally just quilts that you kind of wrap around you. So they can minimize the amount of fabric, the amount of materials, and no zippers or anything like that that's going to add weight, add bulk. And so this is a minimal way to be warm and comfortable at night. Now, I think these are great. These are a cool invention, and some people swear by them. I typically don't find them to be as comfortable as sleeping bags. You can definitely shave weight and bulk by using these, but a couple of things that I don't really like about them that I think are worth knowing is, one, there's no hood on really any of these. So you really need to be either wearing beanies or wearing balaclavas or wearing something additional that's going to add warmth for your head, because there isn't anything to just tuck into. The other thing that will tend to happen is you will get drafts and you will just get some like cold spots that kind of enter in. Now, this might all seem kind of like strange, like how is that keeping you warm underneath you? Well, the idea behind quilts is that when you are laying on top of your sleeping bag, you're actually crushing the down, and then there's no loft underneath you. And then the only reason why down keeps you warm is because the air gaps fill up with hot air, and essentially that is what keeps you warm. So when you've compressed this all the way down by laying on it, you get almost no warmth or insulation. When you see these quilts, they are relying upon the mattress itself to provide the warmth from beneath you, and then these provide the warmth on top. Now, these are great. I know that people love them in the thru hiking and like long distance community. I personally do not think that if you are getting into backpacking, I would not spend my money here on a quilt. I would get a more traditional sleeping bag. I just think they're safer, they're easier, they're less finicky, they're not drafty, and on really, really cold nights, or if you were to have a failure with your mattress, you have more to keep you warm. Now, I say all that as a caveat because my favorite option for sleeping actually is a quilt, but it's a quilt with a twist. And I've talked about it before on this channel, but I think it's worth bringing up, so I'm gonna pull it out right now and show you. This to me right here is the game changer for sleep. Now, I've talked about the ZenBivy system many times on the channel, and I don't have a sponsorship or any affiliation with them, but I genuinely think this is one of the best inventions for backcountry sleep that I've ever seen. So this is a quilt just like the other one that I showed you. It doesn't have, anything to wrap around you underneath. However, they've integrated it with this sheet that is still minimal, still lightweight, that really makes a big difference. So what I will do when I get to camp is lay this out, and then I will actually connect these all together. And what this does is it creates a draft guard. So essentially, as I move throughout the night, even if I'm, rolling and twisting and turning, this is going to stay on top of me, and it's going to keep this from creating a big waft or a draft that's going to move through, and I'm going to lose all of that warm air. And it might not seem like much, but it actually makes a dramatic difference. Now, they call this the light bed or the ultralight bed, and I think that genuinely it comes as close as anything I've ever used to feeling like a bed in the backcountry. And then the other benefit of this sheet is that you actually do have something that you can kind of hide under or tuck your head in. I also like that it naturally keeps a pillow from floating all over the place, and it keeps it in place. This is actually the moderately priced version of it, and I think it comes in around $450 to $500 for the sheet and the quilt combo, which I think, even though that's at the upper end of everything, I still think that that's actually like possibly worth investing in for a lot of people because of how good the sleep is and how comfortable this thing really is. Now, this is the 25-degree version. I've used this down to around 35 degrees and been very comfortable. However, if it's going to be colder than that, I would recommend actually going for the 10-degree version, which is quite a bit loftier, quite a bit bulkier. But for most backpackers, I think you can get away with the 25-degree version. And then you have some really nice weight savings while also having a very comfortable bed for you at the end of the night. So those are sleeping bags and quilts. This is my all-time favorite, but I think for most people who are getting into backpacking, you're probably not going to already be ready to drop $500 or $600 on a sleeping bag. So getting something much more low-key like the Kelty Cosmic down bag at like $160, I think will go a long way. That's a really nice bag. This is where I would spend your money if you're so inclined, if you have the budget. This is where I think it'll make the biggest bang for your buck out of anything you could possibly buy. Navigating in the backcountry is a big part of the backpacking experience, and if you're new here, it might feel really daunting. And when I actually started backpacking, maps and compasses were the way that you navigated. And while I still think that those have a place, it's become far simpler and easier to navigate, to plan your trips, and to follow your trail and to not get lost than ever before. Personally, I use Onyx Backcountry. It's a great app that you can just have either on your phone or on your desktop. You can browse trails, you can find where to go, you can use the Discover page to look through trails. You can just physically be browsing around, scrolling around on the maps, seeing what trails pop up, clicking on them, and getting all sorts of detailed information about these routes, descriptions, accounts from other hikers who've gone, things that you're going to need to know for your experience out there. It's just a really great intuitive service that I've had a lot of luck with. I've really enjoyed using them, and they've been a sponsor on my channel for a long time, but I've used them well before they were a sponsor, and they've been just the best map and navigation service that I've ever used. So fully endorse them. If you want to check them out, just go to the link below, and you can even save 20% off of a membership for yourself. Now, I don't think if you're new here, you probably don't need to go for the Elite, but the premium membership is awesome. You can get a year membership for under $30. I think it's a great deal. And it just so happens that it also does help the channel out. Sponsors are one of the #1 ways I can operate as a channel and get to make these types of videos and bring them to you. So If they are interesting to you, just go check them out in the link below. And thanks to Onyx for sponsoring this video. All right, next let's talk about backpacks. The next in the big three, if you will, between tents, sleeping bags, and backpacks. I think, this is a really important category. Obviously, it does make a huge difference. One of the big mistakes I think people make is that they buy these too early before they've made all the other decisions. And the reason is depending on how big your sleeping bag is or how big your tent is, you might need to make a totally different purchase for a backpack. And if you're carrying 25 to 30 pounds, you might want one type of backpack. And if you're carrying 35, 45, even 50 pounds, you're probably going to want a very different kind of backpack. So I think it's really important to actually make the backpack decision pretty much last. And that will really go a long way to making sure that you actually have the right thing on your back to match your weight, to match the bulk of everything that you're carrying, and to help you get on the trail. So if you're like me, when I started backpacking, traditional backpacks like this one from Osprey were like the thing. It's like the only thing that you would ever consider buying. Traditional backpacks have like big full frames. They have nice big shoulder straps, big beefy hip belts. They've got lots and lots of pockets and organization, lots of ways to get in and out of your backpack here. Sleeping bag compartment, main compartment, top lid, all of the things, all of the bells and whistles. And this is what I started with. And this is probably what the majority of backpackers out there are actually using. However, there has been a big trend in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, to go towards ultralight backpacks that look quite a bit different than this. This is kind of like the luxury version in that you can organize things however you want. You can have a lot of ways in and out of the backpack. It's got a lot of airflow. It's made to be as comfortable as possible. Now, the downside with backpacks like this are they're, one, pretty pricey. This one is about $340, $350. And the other downside is they're quite a bit heavier. So this backpack from Osprey by itself is about 4 to 4.5 pounds. And a lot of ultralight backpacks are closer to 2 pounds or even under 2 pounds. And so right there, just shaving 2 pounds off of your load can, for some people, is a critical difference. Now, if you're just getting into backpacking, I don't think that 2 pounds is what I would really, really worry about. I would look to save that weight in other places. And then as you get more experience and feel what you enjoy, then maybe consider changing or upgrading away from a backpack like this. This used to be the only backpack that I really enjoyed. I will say that I have definitely changed, and I mostly go for ultralight backpacks now. Let me bring you out one to show the difference. All right, this is an ultralight backpack from a company called Outdoor Vitals. I've become a big fan of Outdoor Vitals. They sell direct to consumer. They can actually save a good bit of money by doing it that way, and you won't find these in your typical outdoor shops. So this is the Shadow Light, and thankfully, this is actually not a super expensive backpack. This is a $210 backpack. What's unique about these is they have a very minimalist design. There's essentially one compartment where you organize everything, and you access it through the top. Now, this backpack is actually unique, and one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of this one is because it has this center zip where you can still access things through the main compartment without opening up your roll top. So it does allow for some extra ways in, ways out, and this is one of my all-time favorite backpacks, despite the fact that it's very moderately priced. Now, you've got these stretch mesh pockets for organizing extra bits and bobs. You've got pockets on the side. And one of the big differences that you'll see is here on the back panel. This is a very different type of back panel than you'll see on the Osprey. It's minimalist. It's just got a little bit of foam padding here, and it doesn't have a whole lot that's going to keep it very rigid. And you have much more minimal pads here, minimal straps, but they're still very, very functional. And this backpack weighs close to 2 pounds. It is right in that 2-pound category. So it's half the weight of the Osprey Atmos backpack, which is a really nice weight savings. Now, where this backpack is not as fancy as another ultralight backpack that I want to show you is that it's some of the fabric choices that were made. It's kind of got your basic sort of nylon, water-resistant type fabric, but it's not really going to keep water out. It's certainly not waterproof. And if you're going to be hiking in a wet environment, you're going to need to keep your gear inside it dry with additional means, whether it's putting everything in a trash bag, putting everything in dry bags, compression sacks, or things like that. This is the Z-Packs Arcall, and if you are paying attention to the thru hiking crowd, this is a very popular brand. Z-Packs makes very high-end, very ultralight gear. This is a $400 backpack, and very sexy backpack, very comfortable backpack, despite the fact that it has a really minimalist, almost kind of pathetic looking back panel here. I kind of think it just looks like a little cheap sail. This is actually one of the most comfortable backpacks I've used in any category. So it's a very comfortable backpack. It can carry heavy loads, and it's a really nice backpack. One of the things that makes it so nice is the materials and the fabric used. This uses a type of ultra weave, I believe, or it's something kind of like a dynamic Dyneema composite fabric, but it's essentially waterproof. This is just a tube. There's only one way in. It's through the very top here, and you've got some extra storage on the side, and then you can attach things like pads or maybe a tent. But generally speaking, when you're using this style of backpack, you try to get everything as much as possible on the inside of the backpack, organized inside, as much as possible, like I said. This backpack retails for $400, and despite the fact that it is one of my favorite backpacks, I really wouldn't recommend it for anybody who's still on the new end of backpacking. You still have to be really conscious when you're buying ultralight backpacks. You have to be very dialed in. You can't be a willy-nilly backpacker who's just going to attach pots and pans and just whatever's extra onto the outside. It just really won't work like that. And so you have to have everything really tight, really clean. And if you are that kind of a backpacker, then these are amazing backpacks. But if you're on the newer end, I would start with something even like a Outdoor Vitals pack, or like the Gregory Baltoros or the Ospreys of the world. I think those are really, good, solid packs. But at the same time, I think that there's been so many improvements in these backpacks that they really are very attractive. So if you can spend the money, and if you're the type of backpacker who would dial everything in, then these would probably be a very good option to look at. Now, don't be deceived. I'm showing you a lot of very expensive gear, but actually one of my favorite finds of last year was this $80 backpack. This is the Teton Sports Hiker 3700, which is a roughly 60-liter backpack, and I found it to be extremely comfortable. This is actually a really nice backpack at $80. I bought it on Amazon, and I think that Amazon has actually become a reasonable place to buy backpacking gear. I found lots of actually really good stuff, and if you would like a video where I break down all of my top finds on Amazon, I will have a link to it over here, so make sure you check that one out. But this backpack is very simple. You've got a couple of minimal little organization type pockets. You can't really fit much in here. Now, this isn't a perfect backpack, of course, but it gets the job done. You can store a sleeping bag in here. You've got a separate compartment there. You've got some extra straps to add in things like sleeping pads or foam pads, or even possibly a bulkier tent. Now, but here's where I think this backpack is actually pretty remarkably good. This actually has a back panel that you can adjust the torso length on. Now, with ultralight backpacks, that's very difficult to do. You typically need a much more traditional style backpack in order to do that. But this one, you can actually shift this up and down on these stays that are over here, which the stays are what give it structure and support, and it also is what allows for this to go up and down. So this actually was a backpack that my wife also used and truly loved. It fit her really good while also fitting me really well, despite the fact that we have very different body types and body sizes. One thing that I have found in my quest for good budget gear is that backpacks are actually one of the categories where I really believe that you don't need to spend top dollar on. Yes, I do love my $400 Z-Packs, but an $80 backpack, I actually found another $120 backpack that's really good. And that sub 200 or right at 200, there are some really wonderful options for great backpacks out there. All right, let's talk about stoves for a minute. I think stoves are one of the biggest opportunities for really saving money. I think that it's very common for people to spend very top dollar on a stove, like a $130, $150 Jetboil, because they're cool. Jetboil has great marketing. It might seem like the best option for you. And to be fair, like Jetboil actually, in my opinion, has a pretty good place in the market. I will admit that I have made some videos where I truly knock Jetboil. And I don't actually think that it's a bad product. I just think that if I'm gonna be spending $130 to $150, it has to be really, really worth it. And I haven't found that to be that different than some options that are dramatically less expensive. So right here, I have an array of options of stoves. This is the Jetboil Minimo, really great stove. Can have control simmer. If you're gonna be cooking kind of more elaborate food, this is a really good option for you. But it's pretty pricey, and it's also the biggest option. So physically fitting this into a backpack is just going to take up a lot more room than some of these other options down here. Where this excels is in its heat transfer. So the way that the heat comes out of this stove and goes into these coils is very efficient. So you can use a lot less fuel in a Jetboil than you can in a really ultralight minimalist stove like this one that I have, which is the BRS 3000. If you're gonna be doing a lot of car camping and an occasional backpacking trip, then yeah, Jetboil is great. But if you are going to predominantly use this stove for purely backpacking purposes, I would steer you towards one of these three options over here. And actually, this is my favorite option of all of them. This is the Camping Moon XD2F that I have found on Amazon and has still been one of my top finds in backpacking gear for a really long time. This was a $35 stove or mid $30 stove at the time when I bought it, and I have had excellent luck with it. It has the piezo igniter. It is really clean. It's a very good stove. But my favorite thing about it is the way that I can pair it with this other really nice find, the Fire Maple Petrol Pot. Now this is a separate product. This is not made by the same stove company, but it achieves the exact same efficient fuel transfer from the stove into this canister. And it really locks in, it nests in, it's not very tippy, and it is very, very efficient. Now the one downside to it is just physically getting it to fit. Sometimes it can be a little finicky, but it is a very efficient stove and I've had great luck with it. And altogether, this costs about 60 bucks. So the overall price tag for it is less than half of the Jetboil for the same amount of efficiency. And I just find it to be, it's also smaller. It's a much smaller profile. And I find it to be a better option for people who are out there really backpacking. Now, another very common option for backpackers out there is the MSR Pocket Rocket, or this is the Pocket Rocket Deluxe. This is a really nice stove, but it essentially accomplishes the exact same thing as this $35 stove, but it's made in America, it's made by MSR, really respected backpacking brand. That piezo was not as good, but it's a very nice stove. And for a lot of people I know out there, this is their favorite stove out of all of them. This is also really comparable to the Soda Windmaster, another popular stove. This one typically runs for about 80 bucks. The Soda Windmaster typically sells for about 70 bucks. So again, that's where I find that the Camping Moon, which is essentially the same, it's just a great deal. If you are getting into backpacking right now and you're about to make your first stove purchase, I actually think there's a lot to like about the BRS 3000. It is a super minimal, very lightweight stove. It can be your first step into becoming an ultralight backpacker. And the best part about it is that it costs less than 20 bucks. Now, unlike the other ones, it doesn't have a piezo igniter that you can click. You will need a lighter. But it's always good to have a lighter with you for these anyway, as a backup in case that click lighter fails. Now, the BRS 3000 I have used a lot. I've used it on a lot of treks, many nights, and it hasn't failed me. I've even used it at very high elevations and had great luck with it through pretty much through all of the types of terrain that I could realistically use it in. Now, I will say the one knock on this stove is really just the fuel consumption. Because it doesn't have the wind guards and the heat exchanges, it's going to get blown around a little bit more, and if you're in windy conditions, it is just less efficient. So it might use a lot more fuel. And when I say a lot more, probably like 25% more fuel of this versus some of these other options. Another thing to note, when you're backpacking, if you are predominantly making freeze-dried meals where you just need to boil water, these are, again, are great options, boils water really fast. And this canister, I find for my needs with my style, where I'm just boiling water for dehydrated food or freeze-dried food, I typically can get 4 days out of one small fuel canister like this. So if you're going on less than a 5-day trip, then usually one of these will be just fine. If you're on that fringe, I like to carry a backup, of course. But just so you know, that's about how far one fuel can, if it's full, will go for you. So that's my rundown. Save money on stoves. I absolutely think you can get, I actually have a $10 stove that I think has performed pretty much just as well as a $130, $150 stove. There are some small differences, but it's really not that big of a deal. So if you're really looking to save money, just get a really cheap stove and it will perform just as good as these top dollar stoves. All right, I'm gonna tap into my resident old man. Back in my day, I used to use only pumps like this one here from MSR. That used to be the gold standard, and by golly, it still is. Water filtration for me has actually been one of the more elusive categories for me to feel like I've really nailed it down. Now, when I first got into backpacking, the classic pump filter was the standard. That was just what you used. I actually think that for the most part, I don't recommend those pump filters. I don't think that they're that great. They're clunky, they're big, they clog, they need maintenance. This particular one is the MSR Guardian, which is the one pump filter I do think is actually worth the money, despite the fact that it's a very pricey, some $300. Now, the only people who really should be buying this are heavy-duty, hardcore users who are going to be going into some of the harshest terrain. This is the right model for you. I think it's fantastic, but that's not most of you out there. Now, I've gone through many iterations. I've actually used these Grails, which is kind of like an integrated water bottle slash plunge filter, where you fill up the outer container and then there's an inner plunger that you push down and filters water up into your water bottle, and then you can just drink it like so. I've had a lot of luck with these Grails. I think they're wonderful for international travel especially, but for backpacking, I don't think that they are the best option out there. This particular model is also pretty pricey. This is about $180, almost $200 water filter. There are some cheaper versions from Grail for about $90 to $100, which to me is actually pretty reasonable. But the thing that I found for me that I actually was slow to adopt, that I was late to the game, is just the Sawyer squeeze and pairing it with one of these Knock Vecto bags. Now, if you just get a Sawyer squeeze, it will come with a water bag. It's a very efficient, it's a system that just works. However, those water bags from Sawyer are a big pain in the butt to use. And I think that Sawyer would have made $1 billion if they had just developed this bag about a decade or 2 decades earlier. This is from a different company. It's a kind of a niche garage-grown gear type company, small cottage industry brand, but it just is a very easy way to actually scoop water into this bladder. Just scoop it up, close it, and then you literally just squeeze water and compress it, and it will shoot out into your container. As you put sediment through them and dirt and grime and junk and the things that are actually getting filtered out, this will start to eventually, like all filters, will start to slow down over time. However, you can backflush, you can force water back through this way out into the, using clean water, you can push dirty water back out, and you can essentially use these for years and years and years. These are simple and they're lightweight, they're small, so they kind of are like the ultralighters really love to use them, but I also just think that they are great for your average backpacker. And at the price, at that $50 price point, it's really nice to be able to not have to drop like $100 or more dollars on a water filter. I don't want to talk about too many more things, but headlamps are worth talking about. They're one of the items that are a must-have for any trip. This is the Nightcore. This is the Nightcore NU25. Great headlamp for most backpackers out there. This lightweight, simple, rechargeable headlamp is going to cover all of your needs. It's very lightweight, and this is something you really don't need to overthink. Yes, you can get fancier headlamps. You can spend a lot of money. You can spend 50 bucks. You can spend $100. But I find that spending around 35 bucks is kind of the sweet spot for a good headlamp that will last you through a good 3 or 4 day trip before you need to think about recharging it. I do like to look for headlamps that get at least 400 lumens, and lumens is the measurement of how much light these output. And the reason being is that if I'm having to navigate at night or hike at night, or maybe look for somebody or look for a trail at night, being able to put out 400 lumens is really important to me. And if you're putting out less than that, I personally think that that's kind of a safety issue, because it can be really hard to navigate tricky or complex terrain without the ability to really illuminate an area before you really well. But for most times, you don't need that much light. You can just have it be much less bright, and the battery life will go a lot farther. But that being said, don't overthink a headlamp. A good $35 headlamp, or even sometimes a little bit less, will do just fine. Personally, I lean towards rechargeables. I think the days of AA or AAA battery headlamps are over, and just really, it's nice to have something that you can just keep recharging and use over and over again. All right, there is my exhaustive introduction to backpacking gear in the year 2025. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. Just leave them down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Eric Hanson. See you later, everybody.